Daily Devotion with Pastor Balla for November 13th, 2020 from Daniel chapter 6, King Darius. Yesterday we heard that Daniel was given the gifts of power and fame, but it only lasted the night until the king was killed. And now a new king, King Darius, was established. Verse 1, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps would give an account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Initially, King Darius kept Daniel in a position of authority to help with the transition of the kingdom. However, verse 3, then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because of an excellent spirit in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. If you follow Daniel's positions, starting with King Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel was appointed to the king's court. But when Nebuchadnezzar's son came into rule, Daniel apparently was demoted and completely forgotten. Now King Darius comes on the scene, and Daniel is promoted and is going to get promoted again, so to speak, to sort of be ruler of all of Babylon, of course, under the authority of King Darius himself. With these many changes in positions, you can almost sense the jealousy of his rivals. Some thinking, hey, I've been in the king's court all this time, and Daniel comes and goes. But now let's continue on with the account. Verse 4, then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. And then these men said, we shall not find any ground for a complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. Yes, jealousy enters the picture for Daniel's rivals. But they compliment Daniel by noting that he had no fault, unless if you want to consider the fault of his faith. Faith is never a fault, unless you're viewing it from an unchristian point of view. You're viewing it from the world. But even their own words showed that Daniel should be elevated because they could find no fault or excuse to complain about him. And you want those people in the best positions, but they couldn't admit it to themselves. Just like us, and consider for a moment the last election, just a few days ago. How many people could say that they had the opportunity to vote for one of 2 great people? We have to realize that for most people whose names on the ballots, I can't count all of them because there are many ballots throughout the world, but in order to get that far in today's world, you have to have some gifts. You have to have some abilities. You at least have to know some people. We're not talking about average people or below average people, but we're talking about above average people. But yet when we go to the polls, do we sit there and say, I got to vote for the good person and not the bad person? Well, God had given talents and abilities to both people. But now, do we realize this? The rivals of Daniel refuse to look at Daniel and say, he's a man of God. God has given him many great abilities. Instead, they looked at his faith and said, let's try to get rid of him because of his faith. They completely overlooked the many talents that Daniel was bringing to the kingdom. We need to remember that God gives different gifts to different people. Some people have more gifts than we do. Some have less gifts. Unfortunately, we don't always appreciate the different gifts that God has given to others, just because they may not look like us or act like us or think like us or dress like us. Notice the problem. We are the ones judging others. The rivals of Daniel and us often fall into that category. The rivals of Daniel developed a trap to get rid of Daniel because they couldn't accept Daniel and the many gifts that he brought to the kingdom, gifts that God gave Daniel. So join me again tomorrow as we hear about the trap. God's peace and many blessings be with you. Thank you for watching, and please take an opportunity to share this video with others. If you have enjoyed these daily devotions, please consider making a donation to Peace Lutheran Church, 24024 West Main Street, Plainfield, Illinois, 60544. Thank you again for watching.